The Subcommittee of Transportation and Infrastructure and Environment and Public Works Committee will come to order. Today's subject is implementing the bipartisan infrastructure bill from local jurisdictions and address transportation challenges. It's a hearing that I've been looking forward to for a long time. This is the one-year anniversary of President Biden signing the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I first want to acknowledge and thank Senator Kramer, the ranking Republican on the subcommittee, for his cooperation in putting together today's hearings. And we both want to thank Senator Carper and Senator Capito, the chairman and ranking member in the Environment and Public Works Committee, for allowing us to go forward with this hearing. As I said, this is the one-year anniversary of President Biden's signature on the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But I think we all take great pride on this committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, because we gave the foundation for the bipartisan infrastructure by the work of this committee. We passed over a year ago the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Act, $303 billion program for our roads and bridges. It was the largest program ever passed by Congress, and it passed unanimously in this committee. That's no easy task, to get a unanimous vote on such an important bill. And it laid the foundation for the bipartisan infrastructure package. So we take great pride in the work of getting that done. A major national effort to deliver infrastructure we need to sustain our competitiveness and our economic strength for future generations. New opportunities for our workforce. This bill is a lot about jobs, creating good jobs here in America, modernizing our infrastructure. A lot of us have traveled to other countries in Europe and Asia, and we look at their infrastructure and wondering, what are we thinking? We got to do better. Well, we are doing better by the passage of this bill. We advanced equity and we advanced safety with the bipartisan action, and we met the challenge of climate change. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I just got back from COP27, which is the environmental conference that was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And I must tell you, the bipartisan infrastructure package was front and center. Americans were welcomed because that bill did much to deal with our obligations in regards to climate issues. There's opportunities for all states. So, yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about Maryland. Because I am proud of what we're able to get done through this bill in Maryland. There are many, many examples. I'm just going to give you a few concrete examples. Our multi-modal transportation hubs were dramatically helped by the passage of this bill. A grant to the Baltimore Penn Station, which is going to have a new life for the Baltimore metropolitan area. The new Carrollton Station in Prince George's County, which is the major hub for multimodal transportation in the Washington communities. Both are going to receive substantial funds as a result, have received substantial funds. We have many bridges. We can mention the dozens of bridges that have already been worked on in Maryland. We have 270 that are in need of serious repair. I know Mayor Day will talk a little about the Eastern Shore. There are a lot of bridges on the Eastern Shore, a lot of water on the Eastern Shore. So there's a lot of bridges on the Eastern Shore, and many are in need of attention. In Prince George's County, they got $560,000 to replace 2 bridges. That's just an example of what's already been acted on in the legislation. Today, we're going to look at it through the eyes of local government. Why? Because local government officials know their community best. They know what's needed for quality of life. They know what's needed for economic growth. They know where the priorities are in using transportation infrastructure to improve their communities. I am extremely proud of legislation that I originally authored with Senator Cardin of Mississippi, the Transportation Alternative Program. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a substantial improvement was made in the transportation alternative programs by an initiative that I initiated with Senator Wicker, again from Mississippi. This is a bipartisan proposal. So we now have 10% of the surface transportation block grant programs devoted to the transportation alternative programs. These are programs that are competitive but are requested by local governments. The state makes the grants, but these are local programs to help local communities. They're for sensible things that you need to get people around safely, like sidewalks, pedestrian paths, bicycle paths. These are improvements to deal with the everyday needs of your community. Local government equity is also included in the bipartisan proposal. Reconnecting Communities is a program I'm particularly proud of because, you see, we've had transportation programs in our community that have divided communities and worked against their individual interest. Come to Baltimore and see the Mulberry-Franklin corridor. We call it the highway to nowhere because it is a highway to nowhere. But it caused a lot of damage, dislocated 1,500 black residents, and their communities are still hurting today. The Reconnecting Communities allows us to bring these together to strengthen local communities. So we now have a program which the local governments can help us design to look at transportation programs that were not designed to help the local community because we were trying to get people out of cities or out of areas, and it divided communities. How can we use those funds? We need your input to deal with that. And local governments can make a real difference on safety issues. And safety issues to me are extremely important. We've had a record number of deaths in highway accidents. The first 6 months of this year, over 20,000 fatalities. I can mention several in my own state, but I'll mention just one, a Foreign Service officer, Sarah Langenkamp, from my state of Maryland, who was biking home from her son's elementary school when she was killed. Bike safety is something that we can do much better with, and the transportation alternative programs can be used for that purpose as well. We've authorized for the Safe Streets and Roads, another program to help in regards to safety, $5 billion over the next 5 years. And lastly, an advancing climate agenda. When you have sidewalks, you have safe bicycle paths where people can walk rather than taking cars. When we deal with the heated community centers that we can cool down by having a recreational space to help by the transportation programs. When we combine that with the monies we put in the bipartisan bill for electric vehicles and the infrastructure for electric vehicles, local governments can make a difference in meeting our needs on climate. And that was one of the major themes we had at our COP27 meeting. So there's a lot to talk about with our local officials. Safety, equity, climate, quality of life, economy, jobs, and how local communities can help us meet the objectives of the bipartisan infrastructure package. Now, we have a really distinguished group of witnesses that I'm looking forward to hearing from, and we'll give you your introduction. But first, I want to turn it over to distinguished ranking member, Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Chairman Cardin. Thank you to all of our witnesses. Mr. Wilcox, I want to say right away that your senator, Cynthia Lummis, grabbed me on my way out of lunch. I'm the first person to leave what is clearly the most entertaining lunch in D.C. this week. And if you're easily entertained. Anyway, she grabbed me, she said, would you please apologize to Jim for me and tell him I'm so sorry, but if you'll carry that ball, she said, she'll give me notes on the lunch. But anyway, I just wanted to express that right away. But thank you all for being here, and thank you, Chairman Cardin, first of all, for this timely and important hearing, and for your leadership. It really was, for those of you who think that we never do anything together, it's because no one really reports on the things we do together. But this was a joy. It really was to work on this bill. It turned out to be a good bill, not just one I sort of grudgingly supported, but one that I'm happy to champion. And I'm especially pleased with the cooperation between the two parties and the four people that lead, all whose names begin with C. Strictly coincidental. Anyway, but today's hearing is to talk about the role of local government and local leadership in implementation, and to get your feedback, because even the best strategies and the best plans in the world have to be assessed. I think 1 year later is a good time to do that. So thank you for that opportunity. You know, during the bill's negotiations, I really did put a strong emphasis on making sure that rural and local communities and their role in the funding formula, it was maintained, the 90-10 split that you're all familiar with, and really, I don't think with much pushback. I don't want to imply that it was a hard, difficult thing to conclude, but it was important, and it recognizes the role of rural communities as much as anything, the role of a system that recognizes the East Coast and the West Coast, the Canadian border and the Mexican border can only work if it's all hard covered, right? And we can't reserve a few hundred miles here and there for dirt. So thank you for that, and it was a joy. It really does ensure that our states and localities have consistent funding. Very important, as you know, particularly as we face these high prices we have today with inflation. That consistency and the counting on consistent funding is so important. The other thing that we worked hard on, and I was very pleased by, was the codification of the one federal decision policy. Hard fought. Right now, I think people on all sides of the maybe all ends of the spectrum, of the philosophical spectrum, can see the value of that, whether you're citing, whatever it is you're trying to permit. You may be for that or you may be against it, but the next day you're for this and against that. Having a consistent regulatory regime that recognizes that streamlining doesn't mean compromising the integrity of the process, I think it was a successful conclusion, and I want to talk a little bit about that, and I'll be very interested in some of your experiences with the one federal decision and where we are in that. Obviously, and I have a North Dakotan here that I'll get to introduce here in a little bit, but there were a lot of wins in it for my little state of North Dakota. We are literally, there's even a monument to prove it, the center of the North American continent in North Dakota. We're a long ways from everybody that wants the things that we produce, whether it's food or energy, and getting it to market is important. And so this one includes a lot of wins for North Dakota, but it's really more about the country than just one state. Now, the codification of the one federal decision was a priority item, as I said, for other committee members as well as myself, but it was a significant policy win and something that I've loudly applauded. And frankly, I think it should be duplicated in other areas of permitting reforms. But it's also one of the things that I'm most concerned about. So that's why I'm going to be interested in what you all have to say about its enforcement. Implementation is far from complete. In fact, a year after being signed into law, especially, the administration still has no specific plan as to how they intend to meet the law's goal of this 2-year average of project reviews. That's really unacceptable, especially, like I said, the clock is ticking, the calendar is moving, inflation is real. We need to have some certainty. Permitting, certainty, and improved efficiency for infrastructure projects only comes if the agency, the United States Department of Transportation, makes it a priority. And as our last hearing on this confirmed, state and local communities want and need predictable and expeditious permitting. Similarly, the bill included language to expedite NEPA reviews for oil and gas gathering lines if it led to the reduction of released methane. Win-win. See, I'm a person, as I think Senator Cardin is, who believes that not every transaction in this town requires a loser. There can be winners on both sides of transactions, and I think this is one of those situations. If you can demonstrate a reduction in methane, then we ought to have a faster NEPA process. At a hearing in the Energy and Natural Resource Committee, Secretary Holland only acknowledged the expedited authority by saying, quote, "We'll move that forward as we can." See, as we can isn't a word that's consistent with expediting. Responses like these don't exactly inspire confidence, not in our local communities, in our states, nor in the industries that build roads. I know that Secretary Buttigieg just said he's, quote, working on it as well. But to anyone paying attention, it's pretty clear it's not a high priority. Anyway, the main goal here is to hear from you all. I want to get to that, and we'll ask some questions. I hope we have some more participation by the committee members, but I wouldn't count on a lot of Republicans getting here anytime soon. Mr. Chairman, thank you all.
No, as Senator Kramer has pointed out, this is our first day back. Our two caucuses are meeting. There were some interest in debating what happened last Tuesday, and so there is a lot of distraction here today. So we apologize if members are not here. Some, I think, will come and go, but I can assure you the record of this committee hearing is going to be extremely important in our work. Now, I'll just make one observation about Senator Kramer on the permitting. This committee worked very well together on the permitting provisions, and it could have been pretty contentious, but we listened to each other, and we learned from each other. So I just want to thank my colleagues, because I came to this discussion with a different view, but was convinced that we had to make the progress that we were able to do in the bill. So I think when we work together, we can really get good things accomplished. And with that, I'm going to introduce either two or three of the witnesses today, and Senator Kramer will introduce one or two. We'll see how that goes along. But I want to first introduce my mayor, Mayor Jake Day. I do not live in Salisbury. I live in Baltimore. But Mayor Day is an extraordinary leader in our state, the mayor of Salisbury, the 28th mayor of Salisbury. He was first elected to the city council at the age of 30 and was unanimously elected president, when he was unanimously elected president of the council, I guess it was at one point. You know, get your career here. He spent his career revitalizing downtowns and making them more vibrant living places, and that's true in Salisbury. He's worked for the Eastern Shore Land Conservancy and was in 2021 elected president of the Maryland Municipal League, which is not an easy political issue assignment. I'm very proud that he's a major in the U.S. Army and a veteran of the global war on terrorism. We thank you for your service to our country and your service to our community. We are also joined by Michael Carroll. Michael Carroll is the Deputy Managing Director of the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability, and President of the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Michael is a creative and nationally respected leader with more than 25 years of experience in transportation. Deputy Carroll coordinates and sets the policy directions for critical functions, including streets, both transportation and sanitation, the Philadelphia Water Department, as well as the newly created Office of Complete Streets. He oversights includes infrastructure systems that make up more than 9,500 transit stops, 2,500 miles of streets, 320 bridges, 450 lanes of bike facilities, 1,000 Itigo bikes, and 100 Itigo stations, 6,500 miles of sewer and water lines. If you walk those every day, you can certainly get your exercise, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. And I think, Mr. Wilcox, your introduction was supposed to be given. I'm more than happy to introduce, or would you like to make the introductions of the next two witnesses?
Well, I kind of want to.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of want to. So, Jim Wilcox, the reason I want to do it is because you're from territory kind of like mine, but more importantly, because you have chosen to be a leader in an institution that next to church council has got to be the hardest in the world, and that's county commissions. I mean, honestly, that is where the rubber literally meets the road. So I know Mr. Wilcox is testifying on behalf of county commissioners around the country, National Association. He's a former chairman, or a chairman, not only a commissioner with Converse County, but with the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. He previously served as an officer of, this is really amazing to me, officer of the Converse County Stock Growers, Douglas Moose Lodge, and the Douglas Board of Realtors. Currently chairman of the Wyoming Lottery Board. Mr. Wilcox and his wife, Tyone, currently own and operate Wilcox Properties. My only question is, what do you do in your spare time? I mean, honestly, I know you've testified before Congress a couple of times before. Welcome. We're always glad to have a county official with us, for sure, especially on transportation issues, right? All right. Now, glad to have Jason Benson with us. Thank you, Chairman Cardin. It's really a privilege to introduce Jason, who serves as the county engineer for Cass County, North Dakota. For those of you not familiar with the rectangular blank spot in the middle of the North American continent called North Dakota, Cass County is where Fargo, our largest city, resides. But other than Fargo, it's a very rural county as well, right on the Minnesota border. He's been an invaluable asset to my office during the development and the implementation of both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Water Resources Development Act. I'm glad he's able to join us today so that the committee can receive his his expertise as well. I do want to state as a side note that he's not only in DC today for this hearing. Yesterday, Jason attended a graveside service at Arlington Cemetery for his great uncle, Army Private First Class Robert Alexander, a North Dakotan from Tolly, who gave the ultimate sacrifice during World War II in the Pacific Theater. Until recently, his remains had not been identified, but Jason and his father were able to attend the full honors service yesterday, bringing a welcome conclusion to what had been a long and open-ended saga. I wanted to take a minute to highlight Robert Alexander's exemplary service to our nation, Mr. Chairman. Jason himself has followed in his great-uncle's footsteps, serving 33 years in the United States Army and the Minnesota Army National Guard, including 4 overseas combat or peacekeeping deployments. Jason has worked for Cass County for 22 years and manages the infrastructure of nearly 637 miles of roads, over 564 bridge structures, and an annual budget of $20 million. I'm going to skip the rest of the resume because I think your testimony, like the rest, will speak for itself and your expertise. Thank you all for being here.
Once again, we thank our witnesses. Your entire statements will be made part of the record. You may proceed as you wish. We ask that you try to summarize your testimony in approximately 5 minutes. If you go over a minute or two, we're not going to complain. Mayor Day.
Well, Chairman Cardin and Ranking Member Kramer and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for your hospitality today. Thank you on behalf of my constituents and local governments across America for the opportunity to share our perspective. My name is Jake Day. I'm a trained architect and city planner. And most recently, I served, as you mentioned, Senator, as president of the Maryland Municipal League, representing the interests of Maryland cities and towns from Port Tobacco with its 18 residents to Baltimore with its 576,000 residents. But today I come to you as mayor of my hometown, Salisbury, Maryland. It's a small but growing principal city of the 455,000 resident Salisbury metropolitan area, which sits at the center of the Delmarva Peninsula, the breadbasket of the Northeast United States. I like to think of it as the best of both worlds. And we are home to Maryland's second busiest commercial airport, Maryland's second busiest port. We're crisscrossed by 2 U.S. highways. We have a robust trail network under construction. We have one regional bus transit system and even a micromobility company. And as a local leader, it's my job to try to solve the challenges that my citizens face to living the best life they can with the limited resources that I have. But some challenges are simply stronger and taller than I can reasonably fell on my own. And for those factors, we look to our partners in the federal government. Many of the mobility and infrastructure challenges are baked into the asphalt, the concrete, the housing, and policy landscape. And like most American cities, ours fell victim to the progress of its time. In 1927, and again in 1956, 2 U.S. highways were cut through our city and displaced residents. And the well-worn tale is as true in Salisbury as anywhere, that most of the displaced and largely erased neighborhoods were home to black families and black-owned businesses and replaced with interchanges and parking lots. Federal urban renewal dollars were later used to clear blocks, and local zoning codes prioritized low-density and single-use development, meaning decades of investment further separated where workers earn their paycheck from where they lay their heads at night. And these past policy decisions combined resulted in an inefficient, unjust, and unsafe landscape, effectively keeping a community from functioning efficiently. So it's our charge now to rebuild and repair from that context. The bipartisan infrastructure law is a departure from the way things have always been done, and that's a welcome change. When infrastructure decisions are further removed from the communities where we articulate our priorities, investment and the return on investment is slowed. In Salisbury, we articulated 3 such priorities. 1, to build a more just city, taking healing actions to make access to work, services, and opportunity a little bit easier, safer, and more equitable, particularly for communities put at a past disadvantage. This year, I joined mayors from 7 cities from across America in the Just City Mayoral Fellowship, and we worked to identify policy barriers and physical barriers to progress in our communities, and mobility represented the single most significant challenge. 2, a safer Salisbury. We envision an end to transportation system decisions that make it more likely that our citizens will die on our roads. When we know an engineering solution that will save lives, we must fund them, period. In 2021, Salisbury adopted Vision Zero policies prioritizing the safety of human beings over convenience. And number 3, a more efficient Salisbury. A hallmark of the status quo is the inefficient use of limited resources, whether it's dollars or land or energy, material. They're all treated as more expendable than we know they are. And we envision a city more respectful of the rural landscape around us and the planet as a whole. I believe local officials should be trusted more than we have historically been to know what's best for our cities, counties, and towns. Americans trust local government to respond to their needs. Whatever the ownership of a given right-of-way, you can rest assured your county commissioner or mayor has been called about it. Setting and delivering community priorities is our bread and butter. The benefits of direct allocation of infrastructure dollars to America's cities and towns is being felt in town halls and city council chambers nationwide. In Salisbury, we feel strongly this has become a moment of opportunity where we're being treated more fully as a partner in shaping our destiny. With adequate resources and through programs like Safe Streets for All and Transportation Alternatives, and with the trust of our federal partners, we can get about the business of delivering on the vision of a litany of projects, each of which would have remained a pipe dream or languished due to a deficit of resources were it not for the bipartisan infrastructure law. The principles of flexibility, human focus, direct allocation to local governments, and increased appropriations should be preserved in future infrastructure legislation. In particular, rural communities have more opportunity to compete when burdens on applicants are simplified. So 1 year on from the adoption of the bipartisan infrastructure law, the view from City Hall is an optimistic one. In my opinion, this law is a powerful signal that we're a more trusted partner to our federal representatives than ever before. My city will be more just, safe, and efficient as a result of you placing that trust in us and providing us additional resources with which to deliver. I want to thank you for your confidence, and I thank you for your attention to this critical matter for our nation and for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Carroll?
Good morning, Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Kramer, and members of the subcommittee. On behalf of Mayor Jim Kenney and the City of Philadelphia, I'm profoundly grateful to testify. I'm Mike Carroll, Deputy Managing Director of the Office of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Sustainability. As was mentioned, I oversee the Philadelphia Department of Streets, the Philadelphia Water Department, and the Office of Sustainability. I'm also interim president of the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Philadelphia's 2018 Strategic Transportation Plan celebrates the connection between the quality of our infrastructure and the tangible benefit to people's lives. These values match those of the bipartisan infrastructure law. After decades of neglect, this is crucial if we want to ensure that world-class infrastructure remains at the center of the American agenda. We place every effort to align our infrastructure priorities with those of our constituents. I appreciate Senator Cardin's mention of the large inventory of assets that we manage. These assets are well used. Our main regional transit authority, SEPTA, carried over 100 million riders last year after the pandemic. In some areas, nearly 20% of our commute trips are made by cycling. In our center city, several corridors carry 30,000 pedestrians per day. Our historic city retains its colonial-era character with great pride, and it isn't physically possible for us to move enough people without robust options for transit, biking, and walking. The bipartisan infrastructure law strengthens our hand to deliver these safe transportation alternatives. Many Philadelphians rely on our trails and bike network to conduct their daily lives. We're eager to implement $4 million in grants from the Transportation Alternatives Program to improve walking and biking safety around schools, to add pedestrian and bike connections to the jobs at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And this funding will also help complete Philadelphia's section of the East Coast Greenway from Maine to Florida. The ways infrastructure binds our country together are more than just symbolic. We agree with the law's emphasis on equity as well, because addressing social inequality means more opportunity. On the section of US Route 1 in Philadelphia called Roosevelt Boulevard, we used CMAQ funds to create high-quality bus stations and express transit service. People once stood in patches of dirt next to a 12-lane highway, waiting to take a circuitous bus ride to their destination. In 1 year, the new service had a 17% increase in ridership, the highest increase in the whole system. One person told us the shorter travel times saved her job. We will seek more funding to extend this to other parts of Philadelphia, and this will be one key to updating the entire bus network. One neighborhood will have 65,000 more jobs accessible within a 45-minute bus ride than can be reached today. The list of projects we requires us to grow our talent pool aggressively. USDOT's recommitment to on-the-job training, disadvantaged business enterprises, and flexibility on local hiring sets a bar for our own local efforts. Our recently awarded $25 million RAISE grant will help us take on a host of infrastructure challenges in 7 historically disinvested neighborhoods around the city. We can now make safety improvements to roads where nearly 1,000 people have been involved in traffic crashes in recent years. We'll be paving streets that haven't been paved in more than a quarter century. We will also use community engagement around our projects to point people to jobs and contracting opportunities. These projects shouldn't just change the physical conditions of neighborhoods, they should contribute to the life prospects of the people who live in these neighborhoods. Direct aid to cities is something else we appreciate. I was thrilled to join FHWA, Amtrak, SEPTA, and the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation to celebrate the city being awarded $1.5 million in direct bridge improvement program funding. Our project will pilot strategies to accelerate bridge rehabilitation over electrified rail lines. Although the Philadelphia will immediately benefit as a community from these improvements, the model will serve our whole state and communities across the country in the long term as well. We're proud to propose a project called Reconnecting Our Chinatown for the Reconnecting Communities program. This takes up Secretary Buttigieg's direct challenge to the city of Philadelphia to fix the harm done in carving our Chinatown community in half with the Vine Street Expressway in the 90s. We developed a CAP project to provide neighborhood space over top of the roadway without impacting throughput on that vital artery. In general, the mix of approaches present in the infrastructure law provides excellent alignment of resources to the infrastructure needs we experience at the local level. We are very grateful. At the end of the day, we need Congress to stay focused on infrastructure, though. Even with this historic investment, the legacy of neglect and underinvestment will still persist. Our steady attention will allow us to finally turn the page on an era of crumbling infrastructure around the United States. Senators, I want to thank you deeply for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you all today. This ends my testimony.
Mr. Carroll, thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Wilcox?
Thank you, Chairman Cardin and Ranking Member Kramer. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been a commissioner for 16 years, and I currently serve as chairman of our local board and president of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And I'm here today on behalf of the National Association of Counties as well. And I can assure you, roads are a top priority for commissioners. Converse County is located in central Wyoming, and just like 2/3 of America's counties, we are considered rural. Converse County is home to the country's largest uranium mine, significant oil and gas reserves, 5 wind farms, solar potential, and sprawling cattle and sheep ranches. We are critical to the United States' natural resource and energy production. County governments own 44% of public roads and 38% of the bridges, more than any other level of government. Counties invest annually over $60 billion into the construction, maintenance, and operation of our transportation system. To paraphrase an old saying, a road is only good as its weakest mile. The connectivity of interstates and U.S. highways to gravel county roads and one-lane bridges is vital. If you can't get to the interstate, what good is it? We are pleased to see that infrastructure continues to be a bipartisan topic, not red or blue, but red, white, and blue as a topic. And we want you to know that America's counties are working to deliver transformational infrastructure projects for our residents, and our counties continue to need a responsive federal partner. In Wyoming, the IAJA will help us repair or rehabilitate 45 local and off-system bridges. Many of these bridges are low volume and could be only one lane, but they may be the only connection to emergency services, economic operations, or schools. The IIJA significantly increased the number of competitive funding opportunities and created new programs such as the Bridge Investment Program, which has been vital for counties in Wyoming and across the nation. The Rural Surface Transportation Block Grant and the new Safe Streets for All programs are also important new opportunities. But as we look forward, federal policymakers should eliminate obstacles and ensure the timely establishment and rollout of competitive grant awards. Counties believe that the new practice, such as using a common application for multiple funding opportunities that the U.S. Department of Transportation has implemented, is a step in the right direction. One of the best things in the bills, and you've referenced it, is the one federal decision. We support and applaud that effort. However, 2 obstacles still remain. The Buy American provisions, which we support in concept, and I think we all do, should be applied in a common sense, flexible way that appreciates any lack of domestic availability or grand costs inconsistent with the public interest, as we balance stewardship of taxpayer dollars with the policy goal of building domestic capacity. And waivers should be issued accordingly. Streamlining the federal permitting process is a long-standing priority of local governments. One federal decision is a step in the right direction, but the NEPA process is still cumbersome and counterproductive. There is little to no reason to go through the NEPA process to work or replace a county road or bridge that's been in place for decades. The NEPA in this case only adds costs, delays, and frustration to the real goal of implementing and improving our transportation system. In that same, we believe that the categorical exclusion needs to be expanded further and more flexibility allowed. While county officials appreciate the creation of dozens of new opportunities in this bill, we do not believe competitive opportunity should come in lieu of the continued direct federal funding for locally owned infrastructure. When the national transportation system is considered, too often only federal highways come to mind. A fellow commissioner of mine must use gravel and paved county roads, city, state, and federal highways with delivering his cattle to market, all in a 2.5-hour trip. In resource-rich northern Converse County, workers take similar trips every day to help energize our country. Breakdowns in the supply chain can be mitigated at the local level if we are equipped to do so, which includes having the maximum flexibility possible to use federal grants. As proven good stewards of federal dollars, county officials believe a direct, consistent federal funding stream for local roads and bridges will continue to ensure a robust infrastructure for the future. Wyoming's Governor Mark Gordon has noted that the debt from this bill and others passed in response to the pandemic will be carried by future generations. So therefore, we have an obligation to make generational investments with these funds. County officials live and work in our communities every day. We know the needs of our communities better than the Federal Highway Administration, and I dare say better than Congress. Allowing more time and broad flexibility, which are a portion of this bill, and we appreciate that, offers the best opportunity to do meaningful improvements for our communities and for future generations. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Commissioner Wilcox, thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Benson?
Chairman Cardin, Ranking Member Kramer, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm Jason Benson, the County Engineer for Cass County, North Dakota. I'm a member of the Legislative Committee for the North Dakota Association of County Engineers, and I'm an active member of the National Association of County Engineers, consisting of over 3,000 fellow county engineers and highway superintendents across the country. Cass County is the most populous county in North Dakota and has a population of over 180,000, which is roughly 24% of the state's population. Our highway system consists of 637 miles of roadway covering nearly 1,800 square miles. In 2019, the North Dakota Legislature requested a study of the transportation infrastructure needs of all counties, townships, and tribes in North Dakota. This study was completed by the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute, which is headquartered in Cass County. This study determined that over the next 20 years, an estimated $10.5 billion is needed in maintaining and preserving our county roads and bridges. In Cass County alone, the estimated cost for the next 20-year span is $514 million in needs. These significant long-term infrastructure needs are influenced by the agricultural industry across North Dakota, which requires over 1.4 million truckloads just to get the crops off the field every fall. In addition, there are over a million other truckloads needed to keep our farms producing high-quality crops. This heavy agricultural traffic taxes the durability and safety of these local roads. These roads were designed and built for the trucks and farm equipment of the 1960s. They're not built for the way that reflects today's traffic and use. Influencing the cost of construction is a significant rise in North Dakota construction costs. To keep up with the construction cost increases since 2000, our federal highway funds should be approximately $2 million a year instead of our $1.3 million that we currently receive. While we collaborate closely with the North Dakota Department of Transportation to maximize our federal funding, it is no secret to anyone that the current inflationary environment we find ourselves in only adds to the problem. With the passing of the IIJA, North Dakota counties can leverage funding from the Bridge Investment Program, or BIP. Cass County expects to replace over 41 bridge structures in the next 20 years and over 100 minor structures that are not eligible for federal funding. With this focus Cass County has placed on bridge replacement, we still face significant fiscal challenges. One case is the 3 interstate bridges over the Red River between North Dakota and Minnesota. We recently worked with 3 counties in Minnesota to submit an interstate bundle bridge project through the BIP program to replace 3 bridges along the state's border. The bridges are over 70 years old and are deficient in design and size and can no longer safely accommodate large trucks or agricultural equipment. The federal funds requested for this BIP grant is over $23 million, with the non-federal funding coming from each co-applicants. Awarding this BIP grant to replace the 3 bridges will have a significant benefit to the Red River Valley region in North Dakota and Minnesota. Secondly, the IIJA provides federal safety funding through the Safe Streets and Roads for All program and the Transportation Alternatives program, which includes Safe Routes to Schools. This federal funding in combination with local funding has allowed Cass County to complete $5.3 million in safety-related projects since 2011. I want to thank Senator Kramer for his support in the Safe Routes to School funding for North Dakota's rural school zones. As the county engineer, I also serve as a senior technical advisor on the $3.1 billion Fargo-Moorhead Metropolitan Area Flood Risk Management Project. Key to this project is that it includes the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' first ever private-public partnership, P3, which awarded a $1.1 billion contract to build 30 miles of diversion channel, 12 county road bridges, 4 interstate highway bridges, 4 railroad bridges, and 2 aqueducts. I want to thank you and for your support of this historic project by providing $437 million in IIJ funding to finish the construction of this project and provide the region with permanent flood protection by 2027. The IIJA provides a revenue stream that is needed across the counties in North Dakota and across the U.S. Unfortunately, these funds come with some challenges. That brings me to my last point. I'm blessed to have a large staff of engineers and construction managers compared to many of my partner counties. I rely on them for design and construction of our roads, as well as research and grant opportunities. Regrettably, most counties in North Dakota and across the country do not have any engineering staff, with their senior most staff member is often the road superintendent focused on road maintenance. This makes it difficult for small counties to identify grant opportunities and navigate the application process. Since most counties do not have available technical knowledge to apply for and leverage these grant funding opportunities, I fear many counties will not even try to apply without a concerted effort to lessen the administrative burden that comes with these applications. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before this committee, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Mr. Benson, thank you for your testimony. I must tell you, I was keeping track of all the different projects you all have started, and the bill is working. We got a lot of activity going, so it's great to see that. And I'm certain there's a lot more you want to do, and we're just getting started under the bipartisan infrastructure package. So I think it's very encouraging to see the variety of transportation programs that have been started and the input that you've been able to do in your local communities. I want to start with a general question, if I might, and that is, most of the decisions on priority setting, it's made at the state level. If you look at the formula funding, 90% goes through the states. The states have input from local government, but those decisions are generally managed at the state level. The transportation alternative programs are local applications, but the decisions are made at the state level as well. On most of the competitive national grant programs, the state prioritizes and the state plays a critical role in which programs within a state are going to get the maximum attention at the national level. So I guess my fundamental question, having a panel of local officials, is it working the way you want it to work for local input, or is there anything we should be considering so that local officials have a more meaningful role in the way the states are making these priority decisions? Mayor Day, I'll start with you. We can just go down the road and down the aisle.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me start off by saying that we have benefited from countless grants, especially transportation alternatives, that have passed through the state. So I want to be careful in providing you this answer because we appreciate our friends at State DOT. That being said, look no further than the execution of projects within our city limits, where the priorities of a state Department of Transportation and the priorities and values of the constituents that are going to have to use that piece of infrastructure, then a perhaps safer, but certainly compromised solution. And those compromised solutions are never the safest, nor the most efficient, nor the best solution. And we've got countless examples of those. But what I'd like to emphasize is that at the local level, whether it's a master planning process, and I can talk to you about our downtown master planning or our parks planning process, or whether it's a specific design project such as our Eastern Shore Drive community corridor, or whether it's our urban greenway plan or our rails to trails plan, each of those engage the public directly in community-based planning. And those processes, where constituents of yours and mine, of all of ours, but at the local level have had a voice in articulating visions, priorities, their values, and even the details of what they'd like to see in a project. Those processes ought to be trusted. And when at the local level we hear what our constituents want out of a project, need out of a project, and then ask us to be held accountable for it, because they're going to ask us to maintain that project, I would say that we've demonstrated that we can be a trusted partner, and that direct allocation of resources to the lowest levels of government, whether that's a county or a municipality, is the best way to stay connected to those articulated values, those priorities, and again, I believe even the design details of an infrastructure project in our communities.
Mr. Carroll?
I certainly endorse everything Mayor Day said, and I want to be careful not to take anything away from what I think Jim Wilcox is going to say over on my left here. But I think what you're hearing is right. We definitely appreciate our states, the role that they play. We depend on them for a lot, including the technical expertise to make sure we're doing everything the right way, and the accountability is important. However, if we've demonstrated over decades we know how to do something, then we should have shorter timeframes to turn around projects. And Senator Kramer mentioned 2 years. I mean, even for low-cost paving projects, where we've been doing this, decade after decade, and we may just have a few new features, it doesn't seem like even a 6-month or 10-month process makes any sense. So, what I think would be great is if we could incentivize states to achieve some performance standard or something like that in terms of improving local access, improving project delivery, and any creative ideas that make that an attractive thing for them to do, whether it's giving them better access to unallocated funds is an idea that I heard. So it's not necessarily like it's all stick and not carrot. I think that would be really good for us to take up federally, and we'll work with our states to make it make sense on the ground.
Mr. Wilcox?
Well, thank you. And I think there's two prongs to your question. There's the stuff that is directly to the local governments, and we need the broadest flexibility and actually the most time to work there, and that's good. But in Wyoming, it's generally working great. We meet with the director quarterly on a statewide association. Our director attends almost every one of our statewide commissioner meetings, and we have these conversations. What the burden a lot of times are the rules from FHWA that have to pass through WYDOT to implement those programs. And WYDOT may want to be more flexible, Wyoming Department of Transportation, we want to be more flexible, but the box that they're in provides some difficulty to tune it into those local needs and those local unique characteristics. I would say generically, to answer your question, it's working with some refinement. We always want that blend of a statewide approach and direct local. But the more flexibility and the more time we have, it always is better for us to deal with the local issues, inflationary pressures that we're dealing with now, and the nuance that is different in parts of the state, or adjacent states even have different needs. So overall, yes, I would rather it be this way than more be brought to the top. The more to the bottom, the better. Thank you.
Mr. Benson?
All right. Thank you, Senator Cardin. So I'll take a couple different angles to this. So one, definitely appreciate the ability for local decisions to be made on those applications and sending it more directly up instead of having to send everything through the North Dakota Department of Transportation. That being said, we've got a great relationship with the director of the North Dakota DOT and their local government division. One of the challenges that we have found with this is that many of our smaller counties, they may be 4,000 people, they may be 8,000 people in the county. They pass their funding currently passes through the North Dakota DOT, who's Title VI compliant. Their county may not be Title VI compliant for exercising and using those federal funds. So we still have those small counties that need to go back to the DOT and say, we need your help in assisting those funds to go through them, or else they have to go through this compliance process, which for a small community may not be something that they're able to do.
Thank you. Senator Kramer.
Thank you. Again, Mr. Benson, I want to start with you, and then we'll go back around and talk a little bit about you talked extensively about the bridge, and there are two bridge funding programs. I think you said you have 41 major bridges in Cass County, 100, maybe smaller ones. And as I recall, North Dakota statewide, it's like, hundreds, many hundreds of bridges, obviously. Maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit on not just your experience, but maybe advising others how to take advantage of that program, and then advise us on how we, if we can, how we would tweak it, simplify it, or for that matter, how the DOT might simplify it or allow more maximization of the bridge program. Because one thing we have heard, as tough as our roads are, our bridges create really a very significant challenge and safety risk. So if you just elaborate a little bit on the bridge program.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Senator Kramer. So in Cass County and the counties that border Minnesota in North Dakota have about half of the county bridges in the state because of the winding, meandering rivers that flow to the Red River to the north. And because of that, yeah, so I've got 450 or 550 bridges, of which about half are on the federal system of 20 feet or greater. And that's similar to other neighboring counties. And so it's a massive infrastructure demand that many of those bridges were put in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And again, for the old tandem grain truck or single axle grain truck, not the semi truck and large equipment that they need to carry today. So to be able to use this program to bundle bridges, and I think it really takes it upon counties to look differently. A lot of them are used to looking at like, okay, we've got a couple bad bridges, how can we get them done? Well, 2 years from now, we can save up, we'll apply for some federal funding, we might have some local money to match, and we can knock out this bridge or maybe one or two bridges. But we gotta look bigger now to look out and having a 5-year, 10-year plan on how we can bundle these into one project to submit through the BIP program. And then, if we can get that more of a bridge bundle to complete 6, 8, 10 bridges in a county, or maybe it's, marrying that project up with your sister county, and locally there might be 3 or 4 bridges that is in the same part of your county that you could lump those together and have one large project, and again knock out, But even for North Dakota to be able to do $5 or $10 million, that's a lot of bridges that can be completed.
Let's just go this way and give you guys a break. Wyoming's probably similar.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think what is valuable to realize is kind of that connectivity issue that I talked about. If you can't get to the next road, what do you do? And you can travel on a poor road, you can travel on a bad gravel road, but if that bridge has failed, you're not going to get there. And the focus on bridges in this bill is really valuable. WYDOT in Wyoming is passing through 35% instead of the statutory minimum 15%, so we can do a lot more of those bridges to increase that connectivity. I mean, we have old rail cars that are bridges. We got an old rail car, you process small trainage, and it works to a certain point. But as you point out, the vehicles that we travel and the volume is different. But I think the focus on bridges is really positive. In our state, they're passing through more so we can do more to cities, towns, and counties. But I do think that we will continue to need to focus on bridges, whether they are rural or municipal, because I think those are our biggest threat to our infrastructure is the bridges and making sure we keep that connectivity to get from point A to B.
Mr. Carroll, before you answer that question, what the heck happened to the Eagles last night? That was one of the craziest. But you got that one loss, now you
Yeah,
can move
yeah,
forward.
no comment. Yeah, hopefully it's just that, right? It's just that. I could
Bri-
take one
bri-
loss.
Bridges.
I could take one loss.
One loss will do.
Thank you for that.
You were coming to Washington, so you wanted to make.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
you go.
Hospital.
There you
I,
go.
I would have much bigger smile if things went
This
the
is
other
why
way.
he's a politician.
That's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll say, you know, just as you've heard from my colleagues, in a municipal environment, losing a bridge isolates the community. And, you know, that's profound. People who rely on walking and biking in particular, if that bridge, which they've walked across for their whole lives, is out, and some of them are out, that really has a huge impact on their quality of life, their life opportunities. And so we want to prioritize those projects, but we need the resources to do that. And the bridge projects can be very complicated in an urban environment. So I mentioned the program we're trying to kick off around bridges over electrified lines. Those are very complex because we need to coordinate the removal, the replacement of this infrastructure that we don't own before we can get to the infrastructure we do own to make fixes, and that could add years to project timelines. And so everything we can do to keep the focus on these bridges is going to help us a ton. You know, we need to ramp up to that, though. And so it's good to have some planning funds, some capacity building worked into the infrastructure law. And it may take us a little bit of time to get to actual fixes, but if we take that perspective, this is more of a marathon, I think we're going to be very happy across the country with the end results.
Well said. Mr. Mayor, we're going to stall for Chairman Carper to gather his thoughts.
Happy to. So, Senator, there's just two. I'll share two things, and both sort of positive tales. One, we really appreciate the funding that has been received in our community to address the rebuild of our Mill Street and Naylor Mill Road bridges. But there's a second tale, and this is of U.S. Route 13 business right in the center of our city, which has been going through a multi-year design process and some construction to replace a 1929 bridge. And there's the cautionary tale here is around flexibility. So the original design of this project, of this bridge replacement, which included federal, state, and local dollars, was oriented on incorporating the Maryland State Highway Administration's standard for bike lanes. And this standard would have put bike lanes on a 35,000 car a day road, open to and adjacent to traffic, rather than recognizing that there was a parallel planning process ongoing at the local level for an urban greenway that would be adjacent and could, if collaboratively designed, prioritize safety as we wanted to, prioritize, and a principle that Maryland State Highway Administration has, and prioritize the throughput necessary on a 35,000 person a car day, which I use every single day, which matters to all of us. And so when you look at those two processes in parallel, you'd see an obvious solution. Well, just put it up on a curb and have the multi-user path right there, and everybody's happy. But that's not the way things happen. They happen in a silo, and the state DOT is working on its plans, and at the local level, we're working on ours. And so the solution has been we're working together now. But it took somebody recognizing and arguing for why can't we collaboratively work on these processes, which again bring local vision, local priorities, local values into a process, and trust us with those things. And so ultimately things have worked out, but I do think we could have saved money and we could have saved time if that had been the standard way of doing business.
We are joined by our distinguished chairman.
No, it's me.
But I just want to underscore the point that Senator Kramer said earlier. The four Cs, Senator Kramer and Senator Cardin were the subcommittees, but it was Senator Carper and Senator Capito who set up the climate that we could have the success of the bipartisan infrastructure bill by the work we did in our committee. We're really fortunate about his leadership on this committee. Senator Carper.
Thank you, Ben. To you and to your wingman and our good friend, Kevin. thank you for your leadership. I think if people across the country, many of whom I've heard say, why don't you work together in Washington? Why don't you just find stuff you can work together in? But we passed, with a lot of support from these two gentlemen and certainly from Senator Capito and others, the most extensive, I think, meaningful, consequential bipartisan infrastructure bill we've ever passed. And we're very proud of that. It's one thing to pass it, it's another thing to implement it. And part of our job, as you know, is to do oversight, and we're doing that, and that's part of what today's hearing is all about. A special welcome to our friend from Salisbury, Maryland, and in Delaware we have no commercial television, and there are a couple of TV stations down in Salisbury, and as Ben knows, if you want a message to whether it's people in Delmarva, Maryland, or the people in Delmarva that are from Delaware, you want to be on your stations, and so we think a lot about Salisbury and the news coverage that you provide, the information you provide, on whether it's transportation infrastructure or any variety of other things. But we welcome you all today. I walked in, Mr. Carroll, and I walked in. I didn't look at the panel, but I just walked in and I heard you speaking, and I thought it was James Langford. I mean, and I'm going to ask you a question here in a minute, and we'll see if you still use your James Langford voice. He's one of our favorites. He's a really smart cookie and a good senator. So you could be identified with a lot worse. So that's not a bad one to be involved with. I think Mr. Dave mentioned Route 13, and we have a very prominent family who came over from France a couple hundred years ago and settled in northern Delaware, and they started the DuPont Company. What became it was a powder company initially, gunpowder. Turned out to be something way, way more than that, and still is doing amazing things around our country and around the world. But the member of the DuPont family literally helped pay for building Route 13. Significant parts of Route 13 through Delaware. Also funded not churches, but schools for African-American kids that otherwise would not have had a chance to get an education. So I think we got the DuPont family with a big boost and a big help. Got Route 13 down to the border with Maryland. You guys took it over from then. That was before we had bipartisan infrastructure legislation. But I have a question, if I could now. Okay, we'll see what voice you respond in. But for Mr. Carroll, a question on local project delivery. But the bipartisan infrastructure law significantly increased, as you know, the number of opportunities for local governments to access federal highway fund, primarily through new competitive grant programs. More grant opportunities will help cities, will help counties, and will help towns across the country to fund local priorities that may or may not be prioritized by state departments of transportation. However, delivering federally funded projects can pose a challenge, as you know, a challenge, especially for local agencies that have less capacity or less capability or experience with federal programs. Some have a lot, some have relatively little. And the question is, how can Congress and the U.S. Department of Transportation help to build greater local capacity to both apply for and carry out federally funded highway projects? Mr. Carroll, please.
Thank you. I'll do my best. So I think that's a great question, and I wish I had a pat answer.
Senator Langford gave it to me, too.
That's right. I should be careful running around here impersonating people, though. So I think we need to look at models that have worked, identify best practices, work collaboratively with the states. Most states at the district level, I think most of the regional districts for FHWA are committed to try and helping communities, but I would say we're often in passive mode where it's the squeaky wheel that reaches out and keeps asking questions and knows who to call in DC or your state capital that ends up getting a little bit further ahead. And I think it would be good if there was a little bit more proactive outreach, and some of the things that worked were really kind of put on the table as part of the program, so that there's a model that we can look to. When program guidance comes out or the notices of funding operations opportunities come out, there's a lot of good outreach, and we really appreciate that. But if we could extend that a little bit longer, especially as folks are awarded, so that they know that they're doing it right, they're getting the support to do that. I think that could go a long way. Those are the ideas that come to my mind.
Good, thank you. I have one other question. That would be, Mr. Chairman, that'd be for the entire panel and dealing with discretionary grants. And the U.S. Department of Transportation is still working, as you know, to develop the notice of funding opportunities for a number of new discretionary grant programs, including something called the Protect grants and grants for communities that are charging and fueling initiatives. Charging and fueling infrastructure, EV and hydrogen fueling stations, that sort of thing. We put a lot of money into that, and we want to make sure we get our money's worth. Last time I checked, 30% of the carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in our country come from our mobile sources. So this is, as you know, hugely important stuff. But others, such as the Reconnecting Communities program, have a notice of funding, but awards have not yet been made. As US DOT develops funding notices and selects recipients, what advice would you give the Department of Transportation on how they can help make sure that these grant programs work well for local recipients and prioritize projects that will most benefit the administration's climate and equity goals? And I want to make sure I'm going to pronounce Mr. Benson. Mr. Benson, do you want to lead off, please, with that? Please.
Yes,
Or tell me again where you're from.
Cass County, North Dakota, the county that surrounds Fargo, the most populous
good.
city in North Dakota.
Welcome.
So thank you, Senator Carper. So from to your point, I think a couple different things. One, when it comes to some of the new notice of funding opportunities that come out, and then the application periods, one of the challenges that I have seen is that sometimes it's relatively quick flash to bang from when the NOFO comes out to when you have to have the application in. So in some cases, I think some entities are looking at it and going, well, if I'd have known maybe a little while ago, I could have prepped, but next year I'll probably have a project that'll be ready to go. So I think that the time from the NOFO to when the application is due, especially this first round, and I think that's in a lot of cases for a lot of these grant opportunities. This cycle, they're all new, or many of them are new. So identifying projects that fit the criteria. Now that you know the criteria, you can go back and relook and better prioritize those projects within your infrastructure plan, because we only have so many dollars, whether it's a 10% match or not, we only have so many local dollars to expend on these projects every year.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, could I have just a couple of more minutes so the others can respond to this question? Thank you so much. Mr. Wilcox, do you agree with anything that Mr. Benson has just said?
Ditto. Thank you, Senator. I think two things. Going back to your point about the electrification, there's a really good example there of how one size doesn't fit all and some adaptation there. So the NIVI program requires charging stations with every 50 miles is the requirement coming from HAWA. We don't have gas stations that are 50 miles apart in Wyoming. Wyoming Department of Transportation applied for 11 exemptions to that, and 8 of them were denied without explanation. We need to have more, if we want to implement that, there needs to be more flexibility, particularly in those rural areas where there isn't even a rest area for 70 miles on the interstate. So we need to have that flexibility. If we want to implement charging stations, which I think is a laudable goal that we can agree on, we need to put them where it makes the most sense. And the current box that the FHAW is working with doesn't allow for us to put those charging stations where practical. Also, they're about a $200,000 investment from the individual that wants to. It's an 80-20 match. It's about $1 million for a 4-unit charging station. Maybe we ought to put 2 in and make it more economical, because the recapture is going to be extremely difficult. So one specific example, if we want to help the carbon emissions with electrification, let's make that eligibility a little broader so we can get it where it makes sense and there'll be some economic return. And again, capacity for applying is always an issue. The commissioner may be the guy writing the grant, and it may be the county clerk that has to comply with it. So the more simple we can have for all grants is important. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Carroll, please, same question.
Yeah, so I'll make a couple comments about the NEVI. I'll just say that we're really enthusiastic for it. I think the kinds of issues that my colleagues are raising we'll keep our eyes on, because even in a city where we do have denser spacing of fueling opportunities for, the existing fueling options. We want to make sure that the spread is good, that people have equitable access, and, if we can kind of have a little bit of discretion and flexibility in locating the stations that end up coming into place as we zone for different things, that would be helpful for us. I'll also shift a little bit and just say I really appreciate the focus on resiliency in programs like Protect, and especially the capacity building. I've talked a lot today about how important it is for us to work with communities, to hear their voices in the decisions we make. And so the opportunities to do some community level capacity building, to bring people to the table for conversations about infrastructure, is going to be really crucial for us to be successful.
Good. But do you have a favorite team in the NFL this year?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. No, they're not the Denver Broncos. It's the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'll sing the fight song if you like me to.
We'll see. We'll see. I was saying a couple of weeks ago until the Phillies dropped out of the
It's
World
been a
Series.
hard last
It was-
couple of weeks,
It was,
I'll just
it was
say
tough.
that.
It was tough, but they got beat by a very good team. But I said a couple nights before the Phillies were eliminated, if the Phillies won the World Series and the Eagles won the Super Bowl, the citizens of the city of Brother Love would burn the city to the ground, and they probably would.
No comment.
That wouldn't happen in Salisbury. All right, Mr. Day, let's go back to my original question, please. I was asking.
Although I will say our minor league baseball team is pretty good.
Oh,
Delmarva Shorebirds.
Good. Oh, yes, they are.
Yeah, they're all right.
Yeah, they're good.
So I don't want to repeat anything that you've heard, and I do agree with the concerns that you've heard about implementation. But what I will say is there are several examples within the legislation that that have, I think, set a better standard, and particularly we've seen the reduced narrative requirements, the simplified benefit cost analysis requirements. All of that makes it easier on smaller communities, rural communities, to be able to participate in applying and turning around quickly an application for some of these grants. And the other thing I would say is that many of our communities have been trusted and developed experience when it comes to the application for and management of certain block grants. Over at HUD, our CDBG dollars, that's something most of our communities are familiar with how to manage. And so when it comes to the state, the surface transportation block grants and applying for those dollars, I'd say opening or lowering the threshold for which communities can apply and have access to those funds, to even the lowest level of MPOs, so 50,000, urbanized areas of 50,000. I think most of us are prepared to take on those rigorous grant management processes. So trust us to deliver with the limited capacity we have, and to be responsible and ultimately held accountable.
All right, thanks. Thanks so much for letting me go over my time. I just want to say to those of you from Maryland and PA and from Dakotas or for Wyoming, we very much appreciate and enjoy working with your Senate delegation. And we're not all Democrats or Republicans, but we work across the aisle pretty well on this committee, very well on this committee. And we are especially proud of the two men sitting to my right. And we just say thank you for sitting in here to work with us and get stuff done. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this has been an incredible panel, really helpful. I want to thank all four of our witnesses. Mr. Benson, you raised very important points about capacity. If you're dealing with a local government that doesn't have that capacity to do what you're saying, there's got to be accommodations made. So just really want to thank you for bringing that to the attention of our committee. Mr. Wilcox, your point about the regulatory process is something we struggle with. So it's an ongoing issue, and I think your comments are going to be very helpful to us in trying to continue our work together so that the objectives are accomplished. If you delay it's denied. We recognize that. And Mr. Carroll, as you were talking about the importance of pedestrian and bike paths in downtown Philadelphia, I was thinking of Baltimore, which is a similar situation. We can't survive, literally, unless we have safe ways that people can walk and bike. And Philadelphia, you're right. We want to preserve the history of Philadelphia, the population you have in that city, you've got to be able to have safe ways to travel. So I think I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And Mayor Day, I was thinking very much about Route 50 and what it's done to certain communities. I've seen the communities firsthand. And we built 50 so we could get people to the beaches in Delaware and Maryland. That was the reason why we did all these roads to help people that didn't necessarily come from Salisbury itself. And there's an equity issue that we have to deal with, and I think your testimony has helped us understand that the tools here can really help the economic growth of our local communities, make them safer, and provide equities. I thought, Carol, your answer on the electric vehicles is right. Equitable access is going to be a critical issue here. Access is going to be a critical issue for communities that have been underserved in the past. And we're committed to including that in the bipartisan infrastructure package. So I want to thank all four of you for your contributions to the record today and to the hearing. I can assure you we're listening. We're proud of the one-year anniversary. We have much more ahead of us, but we have to build on this in the future, and you've helped us establish that record. So thank you all very much. Before we adjourn, some housekeeping. Senators will be allowed to submit written questions for the record through the close of business on Tuesday, November 29th. We will compile those questions, send them to our witnesses. We will ask you to reply by Tuesday, December 13th. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.